Okay, well, welcome to the second part of the Homo erectus PowerPoint. The first part, of course, covered really what they looked like, where and when they were found, and their overall distribution and spread across the Old World. Today's is going to focus more on Homo erectus culture. And as I said last time, I think that's what makes Homo erectus distinctive, is that they are the first hominin to truly rely on culture as a major part of their adaptation. So what do I mean by that? Oh, first, let me just reiterate. Here's the timeline, overall timeline for Homo erectus. You can see the earliest from East Africa, but pretty early on, pretty quick spread to Europe and then to Asia. You can see widely distributed in Africa, in Asia, both Java and China, and Europe, up until surprisingly recently. And I added two lines here to remind you that they overlap with Homo habilis until about 1.4 million years ago, and they overlap with Paranthropus boisei in East Africa. That's why it's down here in the East Africa area until 1 million years ago. They are the first hominin to be significantly dependent on culture for a major part of their adaptation. This is what allows them to move so widely, live in so many different environments, use so many different kinds of plants and animals for food. And we see this in that they start inventing new kinds of technologies. They start using caves for shelter. Maybe they start using fire eventually. They're much more efficient scavengers of already dead animals. They're probably also doing more hunting, and they are definitely doing some new things that are in terms of social relationships, although some of that is speculative, and also in communication. But don't forget that first dispersal out of Africa, or including areas out of Africa, is by Homo erectus that are still using simple Homo habilis-like tools that do not have fire and probably don't have anything resembling human-like language. Why? Why do Homo erectus evolve to begin with? Why do they start dispersing like this? One popular hypothesis, is that in the late Pliocene, when Homo erectus is first evolving, and in the Pleistocene, when they're spreading, this is a time period when the planet is starting to become much more variable in climate. We start to go into ice ages. So you have this tremendous fluctuation and instability of climate. You have very cold ice ages with glaciers in the northern hemisphere, changed plant and animal communities, lowered sea levels, separated by interglacials where it is about as warm as today. Sea levels go up, plant and animal communities shift. And in this increasingly unstable environment, in these increasingly unstable environmental conditions, having a more flexible adaptation, one based on culture, which can change rapidly, is adaptive. It's an advantage because they can shift what they do within a single generation, and that helps them adapt to these wildly changing environments. So the first Homo erectus are still using Oldowan flake and chopper tools, identical to what their ancestors Homo habilis were using. But in Africa, a new tool industry develops between 1.7 and 1.6 million years ago. Now note, this is already after Homo erectus have colonized areas in Asia. They've already found in Georgia. They're already found all the way over to Java by this time. But this appears first in Africa, and it's called the Acheulean industry. Now you will see this word spelled with E-A-N at the end. Same word, just different spelling. You also hear it pronounced Acheulean, just a different pronunciation. They're the same thing. The distinctive tool of the Acheulean industry is a new kind of tool, different from what habilis ever made, what we call a hand axe, flaked on both sides, of a standardized shape, but they're also using other kinds of tools. You're also still using a wide variety of flake tools. You're still using choppers, you're using cleavers, etc. We find Acheulean tools in Africa, in Southwest Asia, in other words, the Middle East, and in Europe. But we do not find them in East and Southeast Asia. Homo erectus do live in East and Southeast Asia, but they never start using Acheulean tool technologies. So I showed you this map before in the previous PowerPoint with where different Homo erectus skulls and such have been found. We definitely have Acheulean technology draw a line on the map, in Africa and in Europe and in the Middle East. And there's a line that kind of runs, well, it sort of runs kind of along through here somewhere. West of this line, we find Acheulean technology with hand axes and all these other tools. East of the line, over here, all the way around in here, we have no Acheulean technology at all. We still have flakes and choppers, but no hand axes. So hand axes only over here, none over there. And that kind of ends right about there. More on why that might be, the pattern might be in a minute. So the distinctive tool of the Acheulean tradition is what we call a hand axe. They vary in size. This is a fairly large one. Smallest ones are about 4 to 6 inches long, maybe the length of your hand. The bigger ones, like this one, are much larger, and sometimes they're a foot or more long. They are flaked on both sides. We call that bifacial flaking, and they always have this distinctive shape, this teardrop shape. Pointy at one end, rounded at the other, sharp edges, and here is a modern replica. You can see all the flakes that came off of it while you're making it. Each of these flakes could indeed itself be used as a tool. Here's a hammerstone. So they are still using hard hammer percussion, using hammerstones to do the initial shaping, but they're doing something else too. The final shaping, the final flakes that are removed around the edges to make it really fine and have a straight, sharp, strong edge, are often removed using what we call soft hammer percussion, where you hit the rock with a piece of an antler or a bone. That gives you more control. You can take off thinner, longer flakes. You can take off more control, have more control. So we're seeing these tools being made in a multi-step process and to a predetermined design. When a Homo erectus starts to make a hand axe, they take this irregular lump of stone and they remove everything that doesn't look like a hand axe. They already have a picture in their head of what the final tool is going to look like. So it's the first standardized tool ever made by hominids. All the other tools we've seen hominids making and using are not suggested by, have no preordained shape to them. Now, what are they used for? The kinds of wear we find on them suggest that they're multi-purpose tools. They may be kind of like the Swiss Army knife of Homo erectus. We have evidence they're used for cutting, for scraping, chopping, maybe even pounding and pulverizing, and sometimes the point, this pointy end here, even has wear on it, suggesting they can be used for digging into dirt. These tools, I'll read you a quote from anthropologist Arthur Jelinek, who was at the University of Arizona. He said that the hand axes are important because they're, quote, the first fully conceived implements whose final form is regularly patterned and in no way suggested by the shape or texture of the stone from which they were made. So you remove all the outside stuff. You make this standardized shape and size and configuration. That's pretty interesting. And they make lots of them. This is a site in Kenya, a place called Olorgesailie, that was excavated by the Leakeys. And it had the remains of a number of animal bones and lots and lots and lots of Acheulean tools, mostly hand axes. Now, it's been eroded, so there were multiple layers of use of the site as a butchering locality, and then the erosion meant that all these layers kind of get compressed on top of each other. They built this wooden walkway so you could look at the hand axes. Now, all those rocks down there you see down there, those are hand axes. Here's a close-up of the ground surface at Olorgesailie, and here we have hand axe. Hand axe, hand axe, hand axe. Yeah, we have some flakes and choppers as well. Hand axe, that's looks like probably a hammerstone, probably a hammerstone, but we have a bunch of flakes there also. Thousands of similar tools plus animal bones that showed signs of butchering were found at the site. It looks like a place that Homo erectus came back to repeatedly to butcher animals either hunted or scavenged. But don't forget, it's more than just hand axes. Yeah, they're using hand axes. Here's a hand axe from Olduvai. But they're still using choppers, pebble tools. You can see the original outside of the rock there with a few flakes removed, very much like what we saw in Oldowan technology. Cleavers, which tend to have a thin, sharp edge that could be used maybe for chopping a leg off of an animal or for splitting wood into pieces, and flake tools. So here's a flake tool. And here are some drawings of a little side scraper where it's sort of blunted off on the side here so that you could use that for scraping wood or scraping animal hide. Some things are shaped into a point, so you could use that for engraving or poking holes in things. This is another scraper, that edge there, and then another engraving tool. Now in East Asia, we have choppers. Here's a chopper. We have points and engraving tools, but no hand axes. Chopper and flake tool technology is still widely used in Asian sites in both Java and China, but no hand axes. So we don't consider it to be Acheulean. Sometimes it's called chopper chopping tool complex, chopper flake tool complex. And it is kind of a mystery why there were no hand axes ever made and used in East Asia. We used to think that hominins didn't get to East Asia until much, much later, so we figured that made it even more mysterious, because we already knew they had hand axes in Africa, and why didn't they take them with them? Now, however, we know the hominins are already over there in East Asia before the hand axe technology, the Acheulean technology, starts. So that actually means that maybe hand axes were just invented too late and they didn't spread all the way. But there are some other interesting possibilities. It is a fact that much of the tool stone used in East Asia isn't as good quality. In Africa and Europe, you have fine-grained basalts, you have flints, really nice materials for making stone tools. Many of the stone tools we find in Asia are made out of coarser materials, including quartzite and quartz, which we found a lot of that at Shugojian in China, and be harder to make hand axes out of. Another interesting idea is that maybe they're not hunting so many big game animals or scavenging them, and so maybe you don't need the big heavy tools for that. My favorite idea, and this was proposed by a guy named Jeffrey Pope, he noted that that line I drew on the map before that showed, east of the line you don't have hand axes, west of the line you do. That line also corresponds rather nicely to east of the line you have bamboo, and west of the line you don't. Bamboo is an incredibly versatile material. It's actually a giant grass. It's not really wood, but you can use bamboo for containers, you can use it for building, you can use it for making rafts, and people today use it for all those things. And another thing people today use it for is tools. If you take a piece of bamboo and you split it, you get a really sharp edge, which you can use as a knife. You can bust open a piece of bamboo and get a sharp, strong edge you can use as a cleaver. Maybe they're using bamboo for some of the same purposes that hominins in other parts of the world without bamboo were using stone tools for.